Gymnastics isn't just grace and gold. One mistake in this sport can turn everything into a terrifying nightmare. From a gymnast who felt something off on the high bar and pushed through anyway, to a woman who refused to downgrade her beam routine and paid for that pride in the craziest way possible. This is Timothy, and you are in Last Memories. It was May 14, 2016, inside a regional gymnasium tucked into a quiet stretch of Ohio. The kind of facility that sits behind a strip mall, smells faintly of chalk dust and floor polish, and runs on the energy of a few dozen athletes chasing something bigger than the building itself. That afternoon, the gym was busier than usual. A local competition was coming up, and only one slot was still open. Whoever earned it would walk away with a meaningful cash prize and the kind of sponsorship exposure that could change a young athlete's trajectory. So every routine that week wasn't just practice, it was an audition. Lester Vray was 22 years old, a competitive gymnast who worked part-time as an assistant coach for the younger kids at the same gym. People who knew him described him as focused, quiet, and almost stubbornly consistent. He wasn't the flashiest athlete on the floor, but he rarely missed. And in the weeks leading up to selection, his routines had been the cleanest in the room. That made him the favorite, and it made Evan Sarto, a 23-year-old training at the same level who relied on competition winnings to pay his bills, very aware of where he stood. Earlier that day, Evan trained on the high bar and used a grip balm to manage hand strain. It's common in the sport, but if it isn't fully absorbed, it leaves a thin film on the bar. During his set, the bar didn't just feel slightly slick. It felt inconsistent, especially at the top of each swing where his hands briefly unweighted, forcing quick grip corrections. Chalk no longer spread evenly, leaving faint streaks where residue had built up. When he finished, he stood near the apparatus, knowing the right move was to wipe the bar down or flag it before anyone else got on. He didn't. Stopping the session would have reset the apparatus and given Lester a cleaner attempt later, so Evan walked away and said nothing. A short while later, Lester stepped up for his warm-up. On his first swing, he felt something off in the grip. He paused, re-chalked, tested another swing, and decided it felt manageable. The bar felt patchy, partially dry, partially slick, the kind of condition that builds after multiple athletes cycle through without cleaning. He thought about wiping the bar down, but he didn't want to break his rhythm. He trusted his hands. He went for the full routine. He coated both palms heavily, clapped once, and mounted the bar. The first swing felt uneven, but controllable. By the second, the heat and pressure of his grip were spreading a thin film across the bar, a mix of leftover oil, fresh chalk, and sweat. Each rotation made that layer more uniform and more slippery, noticeable if he had stopped, but easy to push through mid-routine. By the third swing, the friction had dropped enough that he was making small adjustments just to stay locked in. Heading into a release move on the next rotation, his lead hand shifted slightly early. He tried to correct mid-air. That correction dumped extra load onto his trailing hand, and at the peak of his rotation, that hand lost full contact with the bar. His hip clipped the bar on the way down, tilting his axis and dropping his trajectory. Instead of landing tall, he came down feet first with too much forward momentum. His knees buckled. The collapse traveled upward, his torso pitched forward, and his head struck the mat in a secondary impact. The force of that forward impact caused a catastrophic traumatic brain injury with cervical spine damage, leading to immediate loss of consciousness and ultimately his death. Other athletes climbed up to inspect the bar almost immediately. Several noted that it felt slick. Some admitted they had noticed the same inconsistent grip earlier but continued anyway. A quick check confirmed reduced surface friction from residue buildup. Multiple athletes had used the bar without cleaning it. No one had flagged it before Lester's turn. You know what really gets me about this? It wasn't some huge mistake or crazy stunt. It was just a bunch of little things people ignored. Lester was unresponsive when staff reached him. He was transported with severe trauma and never recovered. The apparatus was pulled from use that same evening, and the gym suspended selection while the incident was reviewed. The official findings pointed to compromised grip conditions as the primary contributing factor, combined with the decision to proceed after early warning signs. I feel bad for both of them, honestly. Evan probably thought it wasn't worth making a fuss, and Lester just wanted to keep his rhythm. But that's the pressure of competition. You're so focused on proving yourself that you push past warning signs. It makes you realize how much athletes risk just chasing their shot. The next story is different. This time, the warning signs weren't on the surface. They were buried inside the equipment itself. It was September 3rd, 2015, at a private training facility off a service road in Colorado. The kind of place that doesn't show up on a map unless you already know it exists. Converted from an old equipment warehouse, high ceilings, foam pits in one corner, a single high bar setup near the back wall. The athletes who trained there had keys. That detail matters. The facility was quiet that evening. Most of the staff had gone home. The lights in the back half were on a manual switch and only one car was left in the lot. Kevin Blant was 19 years old, a junior national-level gymnast who'd been training at that facility since he was a kid. By his late teens, he'd built a reputation for two things: an obsessive work ethic and a preference for training alone. Coaches said he didn't like being watched on bad reps. He'd rather drill in private until something clicked, then show up the next day looking like he'd never struggled with it. He was also known for asking staff to set the high bar cables at slightly looser tension than standard. Looser cables give you more flex, more amplitude on a giant swing, and more stress on the apparatus every rotation. Earlier that week, other athletes had mentioned a creaking sound coming from the right side of the high bar. A few of them flagged it casually. Kevin had heard it too. He just didn't think it meant anything. The thing that gets me about Kevin is that he wasn't reckless in the way people imagine. He was the opposite. He was disciplined to the point that it became the problem. That night, he came back after hours. No coach, no spotter, no one watching. He turned on the backlights, chalked up, and started working through giants, the long, full-body rotations around the bar that demand precise grip timing every pass. Investigators later pieced together the sequence from the state of the apparatus, the chalk pattern on the bar, and Kevin's own training log, which he'd filled out before stepping onto the floor. He started his set. The first two giants went clean. On the third rotation, the right cable, the one the other athletes had been hearing, failed internally. Not a clean snap, a partial failure where the inner strands give out before the outer sheath does. This caused the right upright to lose tension, letting that side dip several inches and tilting the bar mid-swing. Most athletes would stop there, reset, step off, check the rig. Kevin went into the fourth swing. That's when the cable failed completely. The remaining strands gave way. The right support line slackened, and the bar dropped sharply on one side, pulling the structure off balance and collapsing the right upright inward. Because his hands were still locked in at the top of the rotation, his body got pulled down with the collapsing side. His swing radius shortened instantly. His hips dropped below where they should have been. He released early, at reduced height with no clean line to the mat. He came down heavy on his side, rib cage and shoulder absorbing most of the impact before his head struck the mat at an angle. As he hit, part of the destabilized bar assembly and cable dropped onto him, pinning his upper body. He was alone for a long time before anyone found him. A staff member arrived the next morning to open up and saw the lights on in the back. Kevin was still beneath the partially collapsed structure. Emergency services transported him in critical condition, but the injuries, severe chest trauma combined with a traumatic brain injury, were unsurvivable, and he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The investigation focused on the apparatus first. Inspectors confirmed progressive cable fatigue on the right side, consistent with weeks of cumulative stress under looser-than-standard tension settings. The internal strands had been failing gradually. The creaking the other athletes had heard wasn't flex, it was a warning. And honestly, what stays with me isn't the cable. It's the choice to be alone. If even one other person had been in that building, the outcome might have looked completely different. The facility was closed for 2 weeks. Maintenance reporting procedures were rewritten. Any unusual sound from an apparatus now required a formal write-up before the next session. Kevin's story is one I keep coming back to because the danger was something he could hear but chose to ignore. The next case is the opposite. The athlete never got a warning at all. The threat came from above, from a piece of equipment nobody on the floor was even thinking about. It was July 21st, 2017, at a Texas sports hall. A summer showcase was held in a multi-use facility where industrial ceiling fans were running to compensate for a struggling AC system. One of these fans, mounted directly above the tumbling lane, had been flagged for loose bolts and a vibrating bracket days prior, but the necessary repairs were never completed and the fan remained in use. One of those fans, mounted directly above the tumbling lane, had been flagged days earlier. The bolts holding the bracket had loosened. Staff tightened it once as a temporary fix, but the vibration returned. A repair order had been written. It hadn't been completed. The fan stayed active. Maddie Trove was 24, a gymnastics instructor who picked up exhibition work on the side. She had the kind of control that made difficult passes look routine. People described her as a perfectionist about presentations. She wasn't reckless. She was careful in a way that came from repetition and discipline, the kind that builds trust in your own timing. Before her segment, she stepped onto the floor for a brief walkthrough. It was methodical, checking the mat alignment, the grip of the surface, the spacing of her run. She paced out her steps, adjusted by inches, then reset, visualizing the sequence in her head. Everything below her was exactly where it needed to be. The showcase started. Maddie's segment came midway through the program. The hall had grown warmer, the air heavier. The fans continued to run, their constant hum blending into the background noise. A few spectators near the front glanced up at the wobbling fan, briefly pointing it out to each other before turning their attention back to the floor. Honestly, the part that is hard for me to understand is that people noticed it, but no one reacted, and that small moment of hesitation ended up being part of what led to her fall. She opened clean, round off into back handspring, building speed across the floor. Her movement was precise, controlled, exactly as practiced. Witnesses in the front rows later said they heard a sharper metallic sound as she set for her final element. A few people glanced upward. Most didn't. The routine held their focus. It struck me later how that sound was the first sign, but in the moment, no one realized what it meant. The mounting bracket failed after prolonged vibration. One loosened bolt sheared, shifting stress onto the remaining fasteners, which failed in rapid succession. The bracket and attached hardware, several pounds of metal, dropped straight onto the lane, directly into her takeoff zone. She was already committed. She launched into a high vertical salto. On descent, her foot struck the fallen hardware instead of the mat. The contact disrupted her base instantly. Her alignment broke mid-rotation. The twist didn't resolve. She came down in a torsional landing, her torso still turning as it descended, force loading across her shoulder and the side of her neck instead of her legs. Her head snapped sharply to the side. The impact caused a high cervical fracture dislocation, severing the spinal cord, fatal on impact. The music cut. The room shifted from noise to confusion in seconds. Staff rushed in. The showcase stopped immediately. Emergency services arrived within minutes, but the injury left no possibility for intervention. The fan was pulled down that night. The bracket failure was confirmed. Maintenance records showed it had been flagged 5 days earlier and left active. Photos taken afterward placed the debris directly within the landing path. The investigation pointed to a failure that wasn't sudden and wasn't unpredictable. The facility was found responsible for keeping a known hazard in operation, a fan that had already been flagged, documented, and left unrepaired above an active performance area. What stands out here is how Maddie did everything right: her preparation, her control, almost perfect execution. But one overlooked repair order turned it into a tragedy, a reminder that negligence can be just as lethal as recklessness. Some of these cases turn on what a person chose to do with a warning. This one turns on the warning never arriving at all. It was March 11, 2018, at a state competition arena in Florida. A regional collegiate meet mid-season, the kind of event that doesn't make national headlines but matters enormously to the athletes involved. The arena was packed with parents, scouts, and students who'd driven in from nearby campuses. The lights were bright, the floor was clean, and everything about the building looked exactly the way it was supposed to. The danger wasn't in the building. It wasn't flagged in any report. No loose bolts, no slick surfaces, no warning signs. Every piece of equipment had passed inspection that morning. Dallas Croft was 20 years old, a collegiate gymnast in her sophomore year, training under a program that ran a tight rotation. Her teammates described her as the quiet one who never complained, the kind of athlete who'd stay after practice to drill the same dismount 50 times without being asked. What struck me about her was not just the skill, but the attitude. There was a kind of quiet determination about her, the kind you only notice when someone shows up every day without needing applause. 2 days before the meet, during a routine practice, Dallas had clipped her head on the beam during a dismount transition. It wasn't a dramatic fall. She'd landed, walked it off, and finished the session. But teammates noticed she was slower than usual the next morning. Her timing on a release move was off by a beat. She bumped into a chair walking out of the locker room and laughed it off. She didn't tell the medical staff. She didn't tell her coach. She knew what would happen if she did. A mandatory hold, a missed competition, and the athlete behind her stepping into her spot. 2 days weren't enough time to know if she'd get it back. Something about this one really bothers me. Hide it, push through, hope it clears up. That logic is wrong, but it isn't crazy. The day of the meet, she warmed up with the team. A couple of teammates noticed her coordination still looked off. Small things, the way she set her hands on the bar, the half-second longer than usual to find her mark. Nobody escalated it. She got cleared by the team physician in a standard pre-competition check that didn't include a concussion screening. Her event was the uneven bars. She mounted cleanly. The opening sequence went through at slightly reduced speed, but it was controlled. She made it through the first 2 transitions without obvious trouble. Then came the release move, the part of the routine that demands the brain and body to fire in sync, no margin for delay. She let go of the high bar and rotated. Her reaction timing lagged. Her arms extended toward the bar a fraction of a second too late. Her lead hand made partial contact. Her trailing hand missed completely. That brief one-handed grab was enough to redirect her momentum forward instead of stopping the rotation cleanly. She came off the bar moving the wrong direction, with her body still rotating. On the way down, her hip clipped the lower bar, and that contact accelerated the spin. She landed upper back first across the mat. The impact forced her spine into rapid flexion, and her head whipped forward in a secondary motion. Not the first thing to hit the mat, but the part of her body that absorbed the worst of the force on the rebound. Medical staff were on the floor within seconds. She was conscious but disoriented. They stabilized her immediately and moved her out of the arena. The meet was paused. The investigation didn't focus on the equipment at all. The bars and mat passed inspection. What investigators focused on was Dallas herself, specifically the head impact she'd sustained 2 days earlier and never reported. Teammates gave statements describing the slowed coordination. Practice video from the day of the original impact was reviewed. The medical timeline was reconstructed. The official finding identified a prior unreported concussion as the primary contributing factor, with impaired reaction timing leading directly to the missed grip on the release move. If I'm being honest, the part that's hardest to sit with isn't the fall. It's the 2 days before it. 2 full days where someone could have caught this, and nobody did unless she raised her hand. The program updated its protocol to require independent concussion screening before any competition, regardless of whether an athlete reported symptoms. Some hazards stand out, some get flagged. The next case is one where the danger came and went in less than a second. A flicker of light most people in the room didn't even register. It was August 9th, 2017, at an indoor arena on the edge of a small Nevada city. A regional invitational midsummer with attendance that filled maybe 2/3 of the seats. The arena was older than it looked, built in the 80s, retrofitted twice, and running on a power grid with a documented history of voltage drops during peak load months. The arena staff knew about the issue. Brief flickers had happened earlier that day. A few competitors mentioned it during warm-ups. The lighting would dim for a fraction of a second and then come back. Backup lighting existed, but it required manual activation by an operator in the booth. It wasn't automatic. Tenzin Glynn was 23, an experienced gymnast in the open class division. He'd been on the floor circuit for 6 years, coaching weekends at a small private studio. People who'd worked with him described him as fast, fearless, and stubborn about pacing. His tumbling passes were aggressive, full speed in, full commitment through the rotation, no hedging on the takeoff. He'd noticed the flickers earlier. Some athletes adjusted routines, scaling back difficulty to give themselves margin if something went wrong mid-element. Tenzin chose not to. His reasoning was simple. Cutting speed meant cutting amplitude. Cutting amplitude meant cutting his score. A flicker lasting less than a second wasn't going to change a routine he'd done 100 times. If you'd done it clean 100 times, and the only warning was a half-second flicker, would you change anything? I'm not sure I would. That's what makes this one uncomfortable. His turn came up. He stepped onto the floor, set his line, and started his run. He accelerated through the opening pass, fast, committed, no hesitation. The round-off and back handspring chain went clean. He set up for his primary flipping element, a high double rotation that needed precise visual tracking on the way down. He launched. At the apex of his rotation, the lights dimmed. Not off, just dim. The contrast dropped sharply. For a fraction of a second, the floor below went from clearly defined to flat and gray. That fraction of a second was enough. Witnesses said they saw him hesitate mid-air. A tiny adjustment when his eyes couldn't find a reference point fast enough. The hesitation altered his rotation timing. He drifted slightly off the center line. His body kept rotating, but now over the wrong part of the floor. He came down near the edge of the mat. One foot landed on padded surface, the other partially off on the harder floor. The uneven base created lateral instability as his legs absorbed the load. His knee gave, and his body folded into a sideways fall. His hip and shoulder hit first. His head followed. His torso compressed sharply as he landed twisted, the force driving inward through his rib cage and upper abdomen before he flattened out on the mat. The lights had come back up by the time he stopped moving. Medical staff reached him within seconds. He was conscious. He tried to speak, managed only a few words, and tried to push himself up. It didn't work. His breathing had already become shallow, uneven. He stayed alert long enough to respond when they called his name, long enough to try one deeper breath that never came. On the way out, he was still conscious. His hand moved once, gripping the side rail, then less, then not at all. He was transported under critical care and died later in the hospital after a brief period where intervention stabilized him but couldn't reverse what had already happened internally. The investigation pulled the building's electrical logs. The voltage drop was confirmed and matched to the moment of his landing. The backup lighting system was found functional but inadequate. The medical examiner's report was precise. The cause of death was internal hemorrhage from traumatic rupture of major blood vessels in the thoracic cavity, consistent with high-force compressive impact during an off-axis landing. I've watched the witness clips of this one more times than I should have. Half a second. That's all it took. And I still can't decide if I'd call this bad luck or a building quietly daring someone to be the one in the air when it happened. The arena suspended all events pending an electrical overhaul. Backup lighting requirements were revised to require automatic activation on any voltage variance. Not all accidents come with a warning you can catch. This next one is different. It came down to a person staying conscious just long enough to realize something was wrong, trying to breathe through it, and not having enough time for it to matter. It was November 2nd, 2016, at a small training center tucked into a light industrial stretch of inland California. A converted warehouse with concrete floors under a layer of foam, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, equipment shared between an adult open class and a small competitive program. The facility ran on a tight budget. Spotters were assigned from within the program, usually senior athletes or coaches with general experience, not specialists. That worked fine for standard skills. It got thinner when athletes started progressing into elements that demanded a specific kind of catch. Rexton Swev was 21 years old, an advanced trainee working full-time in a customer service job he hated and pouring everything else into the gym. He'd transferred to this facility a year earlier to work on harder vault progressions. Teammates described him as ambitious in a way that didn't always match his actual mileage in the sport. He wanted to be further along than he was, and he made up the gap by adding difficulty faster than most coaches would have recommended. He'd been working on a new vault transition for about 3 weeks. The element involved a high rotation with a body line that flipped and twisted at the same time. The kind of maneuver where the spotter has to know exactly where the athlete's torso is going to be at the catch point. Timing isn't approximate on these. The spotter that afternoon was a senior athlete from the open class side, experienced in general spotting, but he hadn't worked this specific maneuver before. He'd stepped in for one prior attempt that ended in a near miss. His hands had reached the catch position a fraction late, and Rexton had landed the rotation himself by reflex. Most athletes would have flagged it, reset the progression, asked for a coach who'd worked the element before. Rexton went the other direction. He increased his entry speed and rotational height on the next attempts, treating the near miss as a one-off. His logic, based on what teammates said afterward, was that the spotter would adjust as he saw more reps. Slowing down meant losing 3 weeks of momentum. The session continued. Rexton hit the vault at full speed and launched into the maneuver with more rotation than his previous reps. The spotter, calibrated to a slower version of the skill, stepped in on the timing he'd seen before. He was late. His hands made partial contact with Rexton's torso instead of catching cleanly under it. The contact wasn't centered. It hit one side of the body harder than the other, and at the speed Rexton was rotating, that uneven contact introduced rotational torque across his body's axis, a twist on top of the flip he was already doing. His body line broke mid-air. Witnesses described a corkscrew descent, the rotation he'd planned for, plus an unplanned spiral on top. He tried to extend one arm to stabilize, but the twist had already taken his alignment past the point where a single arm could correct it. He landed with asymmetric loading across his shoulder and torso. His head contacted the mat last, after the rotational momentum had already carried the rest of his body through the impact. Training stopped immediately. Rexton was breathing but unresponsive when staff reached him. He was transported under critical care and did not recover. The investigation focused on the spotting assignment and the progression schedule. The vault, runway, and mat all passed inspection. What the report identified was a mismatch. An athlete progressing faster than the available spotting expertise could keep up with, and a near miss that should have triggered a stop. A near miss is supposed to mean something, a free lesson. I think Rexton got that lesson. He just decided it didn't apply to him yet. The facility revised its spotter qualification policy. Any advanced element now required a spotter with documented experience on that specific skill, and any near miss automatically triggered a 48-hour progression hold. Rexton's story is one where the danger was inside the room with him. The next one flips that. The athlete did everything right inside the boundaries of her apparatus. The thing that hurt her was on the other side of it. It was January 28, 2018, at a local competition hall in Illinois. A first-round qualifying meet, the kind of event smaller programs use as a soft entry point for new competitors. The hall was a multi-purpose space rented out for the weekend, a community center with retractable bleachers on one side, fluorescent overhead lighting, and a competition floor laid in that morning. The hall hadn't been designed for gymnastics. The beam sat 4 feet from the front row, and the mat coverage didn't quite reach the spectator side. A narrow strip of bare floor ran between the edge of the mat and the chairs. All day, spectators had been leaning over it. Vita Splint was 18 years old in her first competitive season after a long stretch of training-only years. She'd taken a part-time job at a local clothing store to pay for her meet fees, and her family had driven in to watch her first official competition. Coaches described her as precise, quiet, and unusually disciplined for a first-year competitor. The kind of athlete who built routines around clean execution rather than maximum difficulty. Her beam routine was known for narrow margins, tight turns, controlled balance work, no big throwaway elements. During warm-ups, she'd had a couple of small balance corrections, nothing dramatic, but more wobble than her coaches usually saw. The conditions weren't ideal. The beam felt slightly cooler than the studio she trained in, and the proximity of the audience meant the room sounded different from anything she'd practiced in. Coaches discussed simplifying her routine, swapping out the harder turn for a lower difficulty version. Vita said no. Her family had driven hours to watch this. Her teammates were waiting on her score for the team total. She'd trained the harder version for months, and downgrading on the floor felt, to her, like losing before she'd started. If I were in her shoes, I know I'd feel the same. There's something about having your family in the crowd, the people who sacrificed, encouraged, and believed in you, that makes you want to give everything you've got. Her event came up. She mounted the beam, moved through the opening sequence cleanly, and reached the toe turn, a controlled rotation on the ball of 1 foot, the element she'd trained the hardest version of. She entered the turn slightly off-center. Not dramatically, but enough that she needed to make a small correction mid-rotation. Witnesses in the side rows said they saw her shift her hips to recover. Mid-correction, a spectator in the front row shouted. Not at her, at someone else, 2 seats down, a comment about the routine. Loud, close, sudden. The sound landed at the exact moment Vita's body was making the adjustment. Her timing on the recovery slipped by a fraction. Her foot lost contact with the beam laterally, not a clean slip down the side, but a sideways shear off the surface. Her body pivoted around the beam itself instead of dropping straight off it. Her hips struck the mat edge first, redirecting her momentum away from the padded zone and into the narrow, uncovered gap on the spectator side. She continued rotating through the fall, and her final contact was on the bare floor beyond the mat boundary. Officials halted the event within seconds. The spectator who'd shouted was identified and removed. Medical staff reached Vita quickly. She was initially conscious, talking to the responders, but deteriorated during on-site assessment and was transported under critical care. The detail that gets to me is the gap, 4 feet between the apparatus and the audience, and a strip of uncovered floor in between. Somebody made a layout decision that morning, and it held until the worst possible moment. The investigation produced 2 findings. The first identified inadequate mat coverage on the spectator side was the direct mechanical contributor to the fatal impact. The second cited insufficient audience boundary management, including the lack of a buffer zone between the front row and the apparatus. In the months that followed, Vita's family stayed involved in the process that reviewed the venue's setup and safety procedures. They pushed for clearer standards around mat coverage and audience distance, not just for that facility, but across similar local meets that often operate in repurposed spaces.